Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. Today's video is going to be the update to my mono-colored Planeswalker tier list. So, let's get into it. Now to start this off, what I want to do is I want to go over the Planeswalkers that have moved tiers. That is either because of how things have shaken out with the standard rotation, or just because I've added a new tier of the S plus tier, meaning that S and S plus are going to be a little bit different. You'll see that on the right side of the screen, I have all the Planeswalkers pulled up on my phone. So I'll go over to the Planeswalkers as I move them around to go over why it is I am moving them to where it is they are going. So to start off with, I want to go over some of those Planeswalkers that are moving. The first Planeswalker that's going to be moving is going to be Nissa Worldwaker. Nissa is in a position where, with her mana gains and her abilities, I feel like she's always going to be relevant as long as green is relevant. And so as a result of that, she actually moves into the S plus tier for me. Now, I feel like there are a lot of cards that really lend to Nissa being great right now. And so she always sort of moves around on the list for me based on what kind of removal options she has. But that doesn't really seem to affect her as much as it affects other monocolored Planeswalkers. No matter what, I feel like in the last few years, since she's come out, right? I guess it's not a few years, but like a year and a half. Since she's come out, I feel like I see her more than any other monocolored Planeswalker when I'm playing the game. So she definitely deserves her spot in the S plus tier. The next Planeswalker that's going to be moving into the S plus tier is going to be Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. Now, this is one that I don't actually come up against all that often, but even though I don't face Jace all that often, I don't think that in any way diminishes from Jace's power. So Jace's bottom ability, Unravel, which creates a support that makes it so when you draw a card, each of your creatures gets +4/+4, is always going to be relevant in blue. It doesn't matter what exists in blue, it's going to be relevant. And so as a result of that, I actually happen to think that Jace, Unraveler of Secrets is quite possibly the strongest Planeswalker for a new player, because there's so many cards in blue that are going to enable you to draw cards. And so it's really easy to play with Jace and to feel that sort of power fallacy where you feel very strong for using Jace. The next one that's going to be moving for me is Koth. Now, I know that I said that I wouldn't be basing this really on Legacy, but Koth really does, in some ways, deserve this honor because of how good he is in Legacy. Koth is always going to be good in Legacy. As for Standard, it's really going to depend on what Red has for removal. Red is actually, in my opinion, in a pretty bad spot right now for a monocolor, just because we don't have any cards apart from like Awaken the Blood, whatever it is, that are direct destruction for creature. It's all damage based. And so that definitely makes Red weaker. That said, Koth is without a doubt the best option for Red. The +9 to Red is the highest single mana bonus in the game. And I find that even with the lack of great removal, I'm still using Koth a lot. At the very least, I will use Koth in the training grounds to pick up quick wins, or in some PvE matches, I'll use Koth because I know that I can get through certain nodes quickly, and Koth is definitely going to enable that. You can run higher mana cost cards in Koth than you can run with just about any other Planeswalker in the game. Between his first ability and the mana bonus, Koth is just, like, in my opinion, the picture of Red perfection. The only actual downside to Koth, in my opinion, is that Koth only allows you to use 3 supports. So this 3 supports here is really the only downside to Koth for me. If that was even 4 or 5, Koth would be a much better Planeswalker, but he doesn't need it. He's really great anyways. Now, the next one that's going to be moving up is actually going to be Liliana, Untouched by Death. I'm putting her in the S tier for now. She might wind up moving again in the next Planeswalker update. For me personally, she's definitely an S or an S plus tier Planeswalker. I get more use out of Liliana Untouched by Death than just about any other Planeswalker in the game. And that's just because I run a lot of graveyard decks. I really like this first ability, Fill the Graves. the destroying the top 8 cards of your library is the best library destruction ability in the game. And at only 6 loyalty, it makes it really easy to completely fill up your graveyard with cards. And then with the +7 to black for her mana bonus, you're able to cast cards really, really easily. You get 10 mana for 1 black match, which means that if you're running her with black gem conversion, you're just going to be able to cast out everything that you draw very easily, and then you're just going to keep getting more cards by dumping 8 more cards into your graveyard. I find that I very rarely use the Zombie Swarm or the Restless Dead, and those are really the only reason why this Liliana Untouched by Death is in the S tier instead of in the S+ tier. I know that there's a lot of really good zombie cards right now, one of them being Tainted Adversary, but let's face it, if you're running a Tainted Adversary deck, you have absolutely no reason to be using this Zombie Swarm ability to destroy your opponent's creatures, because Tainted Adversary is going to kill your opponent really quickly. Furthermore, while you can fill the graves to just throw a bunch of Tainted Adversaries into your graveyard, and then use Restless Dead to bring the Tainted Adversaries back from your graveyard, it's really not needed. Because we have so many other things that are going to be able to get you a Tainted Adversary between the Prismatic Bridge and other things that are going to pull things out from your graveyard. But nonetheless, Liliana Untouched by Death is, in my opinion, without a doubt, the best graveyard planeswalker. And since graveyard is going to be something that is really good right now and is, I think, always probably going to be really good, I'm going to have her in the S tier for now and see if she moves at all as a result of other shifts. The next one that's moving, and this is going to be another pretty big jump, is going to be Liliana Death's Majesty. So, as I said, zombies have gotten pretty good, and so as a result of zombies getting pretty good, Liliana Death's Majesty is currently in the S tier. She is, without a doubt, one of the best, if not the best option that you can run for a lot of Coalition events right now, because the combination of Horde and Tainted Adversary are going to make it so that you just outright kill one of your opponents, and there's really nothing they can do about it. Furthermore, the first ability, Anoint, is going to pair really well with a lot of the black creatures that we have in Standard right now. We have a vampire that says when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature, and so by using Anoint, you're going to destroy that black vampire, which is going to come into play and destroy one of your opponent's creatures, and it's going to replace it with a 1/1 human, and the vampire itself has Berserker, so it's going to go ahead and kill that too. So as a result of using this Anoint, you're going to destroy 3 creatures. So for objectives where you need to destroy things, Liliana Death's Majesty is actually probably my favorite planeswalker to use. And then between Horde allowing you an instant kill with Tainted Adversary that your opponent cannot respond to, and then Anoint to actually provide really good control, along with some pretty excellent mana bonuses as well, Liliana Death's Majesty is in a really, really strong place. The next one that's going to be moving, and this one is moving up right now because of a lot of the vampires that we currently have, because we have a lot of vampires in Standard right now, is going to be Sorin. So Sorin, if we go over him, is actually in a really good place right now between his mana bonus of +7 to black, and then the Markov's Legacy, which lets you fetch 3 vampires, and then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you take a vampire and just put it directly onto the battlefield. It makes it so that this Sorin is really easy to use. The downside to this Sorin is that his first ability is trash, his second ability is trash, and so you're really using him for this +7 along with this ability down here. So as a result of that, Sorin is really more of a niche walker, but at the very least, I think that Sorin deserves to be in the B tier because the +7 to black is nothing to sneeze at. And then if you're able to get enough gem conversion down to start spamming that third ability, you're going to be able to do some pretty wicked things. You're going to end some matches pretty quickly. So Sorin actually gets a pretty big jump. Someone, when I originally posted my tier list, said that I had Sorin way too low. And I had Sorin really low there just because there really weren't any vampires at all that were worth using in black at the time. And then it was really just you'd be using Sorin for this +7 with no abilities of note. So Sorin is one that's going to rise and fall based on the vampires in Standard. I actually happen to think that there are other planeswalkers that are better to use with vampires than Sorin, but nonetheless, you can actually make some really fun decks with this Sorin. The Sorin is really, really good. So that about does it for my planeswalkers that are moving up on the tier list that I have. So this part, I want to go over some of the planeswalkers that, or at least for me, are moving down. So the first of the planeswalkers that's moving down isn't because this planeswalker has gotten any worse. It's just that we have so many really good options in black now that I think that Liliana Defiant Necromancer has fallen a little bit. So her first ability is an absolute pain in the butt to go up against. The discard the last 2 cards in your hand to infinite obliteration your opponent is really good. And the third ability, Raise Dead, is actually a very decent ability as well. But between her lacking health pool and her lacking mana bonuses in conjunction with all of the gem conversion that we have in Standard right now, Liliana has definitely fallen a tier for me, and so she's fallen down to the C tier. She's still definitely a step above the other Origins Planeswalkers to me, but nonetheless, she's not as good because we just have better options with the Lilianas and then some of these Planeswalkers down here that we're going to be taking a look at in just a minute. The other one that's up here that's going to be moving down for me is going to be Ajani. So this Ajani just really hasn't aged very well as Planeswalkers have gotten a little bit stronger. I actually don't have this Ajani, and so I'll have to scroll on down. But this Ajani's third ability makes lifelink little critters from this Major Ajani's Pride token, these little lifelink cats, which used to be really, really good. But now there really just isn't as much use for all of those little lifelink critters along with the buffs from the abilities. So Ajani is actually going to move down a tier for me as well. So I was actually going to pick up Ajani with the last Planeswalker sale, but I ultimately wound up picking up Liliana, and I am going to say that I'm really glad that I wound up picking up Liliana because she's way better than she looks on paper. The next one that's going to be moving down is actually going to be one of our Chandras. So it's not that I think that this Chandra, same thing, has gotten any worse. It's actually more just that we have so many other really good Planeswalkers that I think that she falls down a few pegs. So I actually have Chandra Awakened Inferno all the way up here as the A tier. When I created my new account that was free to play, this Planeswalker definitely carried that account. It's really, really good. So this +7 to red is really good. And then the Fireball ability just serves as super removal that's going to be able to also kill your opponent. And so when you're first starting out, you're probably not going to have great access to removal at your disposal. And so having both removal and kill in an ability along with the excellent mana bonuses makes Chandra Awakened Inferno really good. But that said, she definitely drops a tier for me. You could even argue that she drops down to the C tier because I would say that her power is comparable to a lot of the Planeswalkers that are down here. But I really don't want to dismiss the fact that I think that she is an excellent option for newer players just because she's really easy to build decks around and be successful. So that about does it for my Planeswalkers that are going to be moving around on the tier list. Now for this next bit, I want to go over the Planeswalkers that I'm going to be adding to the tier list. And the first of those Planeswalkers is Basri Ket. So Basri is a new Planeswalker that was introduced with M21 as part of a cycle of 5 new Planeswalkers, I believe. I might be getting that wrong, but I'm pretty sure I have that right. And so Basri has the +4/+4/+3, which I think is actually fairly mediocre for a monocolored Planeswalker. His first ability is going to buff a creature and give it bravery, and that's going to be a permanent buff. And then if that creature's base power is 3 or less, it gets another buff until end of turn. The second ability is going to be token-based, so if you control 2 or less creatures, you're going to create X soldier tokens, where X is the number of non-token creatures and non-token creature reinforcements you have, and then otherwise you populate X times and gain X life. So this populate is actually quite good. Because you can do some pretty wacky things with white tokens. Furthermore, we have this Oketra's Everlasting Army ability that is going to put a token down that's either going to create soldiers or populate every single turn and make it so that when the first creature attacks, that it's going to make so your other creatures get a buff based on that creature's reinforcements. Furthermore, because it's based on your first creature, when you use the ability, you can make it so that that creature gets bravery. And so it just automatically buffs into that first spot. And so Basri Ket is actually a really strong Planeswalker. His abilities are really, really good. That said, there are better white token options. And so for me, Basri is actually going to move into the B tier. I think that there could be a solid argument for Basri being in the A tier, but the +4 being his highest mana bonus definitely takes away from Basri for me. and then also Grandmaster of Flowers, who I'm going to be getting into in just a little bit, along with Serra, are I think both better Planeswalkers, and so it definitely knocks Basri down a peg. Our next Planeswalker on the list is going to be Chandra, Heart of Fire. So this is the red Planeswalker from, I want to say, M21. So as I said, we got 5 of them. She shares the same mana bonuses as Basri in terms of the +4/+4/+3. And then for her 3 abilities, we've got the first one that's going to do 5 damage to a target and buff one of your creatures until end of turn. The second ability is going to create a Spellburn token, and then you're going to discard cards and draw cards. That Spellburn token has prowess, so when you cast a spell, deal 2 damage to your opponent's Planeswalker, and when your opponent casts a spell, deal 4 damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. Finally, the third ability is going to fetch up to the first 6 different spell cards from your library and destroy 15 non-red gems. Now, this Chandra was actually made a little bit better. They made her abilities cost a bit less loyalty when they came out with her. But nonetheless, all 3 of her abilities are rather forgettable. And then her mana bonuses as well are also rather forgettable. She is definitely not a Planeswalker that I would recommend picking up over other Planeswalkers. And so as a result, this Chandra, in conjunction with how many good red Planeswalkers we have at our disposal, is actually going to be in the D tier for me. She just really doesn't, she's missing something to be good. Which brings us to Chandra Ignited. So this is going to be the Puzzle Masters version of Chandra. And Chandra Ignited was actually low-key buffed in a major way when they brought in the passive abilities for monocolored Planeswalkers, because they sort of retroactively went and gave her a passive ability. So if you haven't taken a look at Chandra Ignited lately, she now has the passive ability Ignited. When you destroy one of your activated gems for the first time in a turn, then fetch the first spell card from your library. This effect can trigger 1 time per turn, right? So basically, anytime you destroy an activated gem for the first time in a turn, you're going to fetch a spell. It just goes directly into your hand, and that's a passive. Now, her first ability is going to activate 4 gems, which is going to work well with Ignited. And that activate 4 gems is going to deal 2 damage to the first opposing creature and create 2 fleeting elemental tokens. Those are 1/1 elementals with haste. The second ability is going to create a copy of Pyromancer's Gauntlet on the battlefield. So this is going to ignite red gems, which is the red Puzzle Master enhanced gem thing. And then you're going to draw 3 cards. Finally, the third ability, Ether Ignition, I should say, creates the Ether Ignition token. Then you're going to destroy X non-red gems, deal X damage to each opposing creature, where X is the total number of red gems. So it'll sort of serve as a pseudo board wipe, and then it's going to give you a bunch of mana. And it also has 6 shields, and when it loses shields for the first time each turn, draw a card. And when a support loses shields, deal 4 damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. This effect can trigger up to 4 times per turn. So I actually use Chandra Ignited quite a bit for fun decks. I actually really, really like Chandra Ignited. I think that her first ability is a phenomenal ability for just a combination of removal and getting tokens. And then her third ability is pretty solid. The passive ability definitely bumps her up. I was originally going to put Chandra Ignited in the C tier, but I actually think that the passive ability puts her up into the B tier. You can spam out spells like absolutely nobody's business, especially if you're running things that destroy gems, things like Demolish, which is going to destroy a support, and it's going to destroy gems. You're going to find that you're going to be able to trigger a lot of your activated gems, and you're going to be able to do a lot of really cool things with that. She's sort of like a red version that's not quite as good as Nissa Worldwaker, because this Activate 4 can actually do 8 damage to your opponent's first creature and make 8 of these fleeting elemental tokens for just 6 loyalty, which is actually going to happen quite a lot. So she's definitely worth a look. Our next monocolored Planeswalker is going to be Ellywick. So Ellywick's up here. What am I doing with my life? So Ellywick Tumblestrum is going to be the first of the Planeswalkers that we're going to be taking a look at. That's from, I want to say that she's from, what is it, Adventure in the Forgotten Realms. So she has abilities based on venturing into a dungeon and legendary creatures, or legendary cards, if you will. So her first ability is going to venture into a dungeon, then going to draw a card. And if you have dungeon spoils, meaning you've completed a dungeon, then you're going to get 3 gold tokens. The second ability is definitely her bread and butter. It is this Legendary Allies. You pick one of the first 4 different cards from your library, fetch it, and give it half of its mana. Then if that card is legendary, you gain 9 life and gain 6 loyalty, meaning that this, for all intents and purposes, really only costs 3 loyalty and lets you spam fetch your legendary creatures. Because of the existence of things like Tiamat and Old Gnawbone, Ellywick is actually my favorite green Planeswalker for making a dragon deck. It's absolutely disgusting what you can do with this Planeswalker. I didn't wind up putting out my review on her, which is a darn shame for me. Like, why didn't I get her up? But she is a phenomenal Planeswalker. She's got +5 to green, which gives her a tied highest green mana bonus in the game. And then she's got +4/3. So all in all, Ellywick Tumblestrum is a phenomenal Planeswalker. I think she will always be a pretty phenomenal Planeswalker because of the existence of legends. And so for me, Ellywick is an A-tier Planeswalker. I think that you could make a solid argument for her being an S-tier Planeswalker, but her first and third ability being entirely unusable makes it so that she's definitely, I think, an A-tier Planeswalker. With that said, this ability right here, this Legendary Allies ability, is just so darn good, especially on a green Planeswalker. It's just that this is pick 1 of the first 4 cards, and we recently got a Planeswalker that picks up to 4 of the first 4 cards that is green. So instead of Ellywick being in the S tier, we have someone that does sort of what she does, but I think does it a little bit better. So the next Planeswalker on the list is Garruk Unleashed. Garruk Unleashed is an absolute boss of a Planeswalker. This one is the green Planeswalker for the M21 set. We got 1 of each color. So the first ability is going to give one of your creatures a temporary buff with trample, and then if that creature's base power is 5 or greater, you draw 2 cards. The second ability is going to give your first non-creature token Leader Beast, and then reinforce it 3 times. And if somehow your opponent has more creature reinforcements than you at that point, then you're going to give yourself 6 loyalty, making that only cost 6. And then finally, the third ability, Predator's Trail, is going to create a Predator's Trail token, which is going to fetch a creature at the end of each of your turns, and then just put it directly into play under your control. And it's also going to give all of your creatures Berserker and Trample, and then when you use the ability, you're going to fetch the first 2 non-creature cards from your library. So the only thing that really holds Garruk Unleashed back in my book is these generally subpar mana gains, but given that +5 happens to be the highest mana gain that we have for any green Planeswalker, it really doesn't set Garruk as much back as it sets the other Planeswalkers back for that. For me, honestly, as long as green has big creatures, Garruk Unleashed is going to be an S+ tier Planeswalker, and green is always going to have big creatures. The idea that you can just reinforce Gaia's Revenge whenever you want 3 times is absolutely terrifying because it already has 16 power, and so just making it jump up with 3 more reinforcements for an additional +48 power to 64 out of like thin air is just absolutely terrifying. And then Predator's Trail is just going to be able to get you more of them as well. I'm using Gaia's as an example because Origins is always going to be in Standard, so I think Garruk Unleashed is just always going to be a great Planeswalker. Which brings us to Grandmaster of Flowers. So Grandmaster of Flowers is a brand new mono-white Planeswalker. So this one here also has one of those new passive abilities, which just makes it so that when you cast a white card the first time in a turn, your first creature gets a permanent +1/+1 buff. And then for the 3 abilities on Grandmaster of Flowers, the first ability is going to draw a card, and then if that card is a creature, it gets a permanent +4/+4 buff and a permanent gaining of the Evergreen's Lifelink and Vigilance. And then if it's not a creature, then you give 7 mana to that card, and then you draw another card. The second ability is going to create a Monk of the Open Hand token. This is going to be a creature token with the level mechanic, and you can level it up to disable creatures to get, and then ultimately to get buffs on itself. So it's actually a really, really strong creature when you get it going with the third ability. And then furthermore, as long as the card's level is 7 or more, it's going to get double strike. So Grandmaster of Flowers, you can actually just use his abilities and kill your opponent. You can draw into the stuff that you need just by using the first ability. You can create your win con with the second ability, and then you can make that win con just absolutely slap your opponent with the third ability. The third ability is, I think, one of the coolest third abilities that we've seen in the game. As the garbage truck drives by my house, I'm sure you can hear it because my microphone picks up everything. So this Platinum Dragon is going to make it so that target creature's base power toughness becomes 7/7. Then you're going to reinforce it. Then that creature gets first strike, flying, and vigilance permanently, and it gets the dragon and god subtypes. So basically, you use this ability on any creature, and it's going to become a dragon god. Like, literally a dragon god, because nothing's going to be swinging through that nonsense. Because white has such good access to tokens at pretty much all times, this ability is always going to be relevant. Being able to draw cards, giving your creatures buffs, getting extra mana, and then giving them lifelink and vigilance is also always going to be relevant. Grandmaster of Flowers is honestly the mono-white planeswalker that we've been waiting for since this game came out to be an excellent white planeswalker, and is without any shadow of a doubt to me an S+ tier planeswalker. White happens to be in a great state in Standard right now. It's an absolute menace if you go up against the thing. It makes it so that any creature stack that your opponent has or that you have, it just becomes an automatic threat. Even if it's just a bunch of little white 1/1 human tokens. You ultimately have to get rid of them if your opponent has a lot of loyalty or a lot of gem conversion down and is getting close to Platinum Dragon. Because if you don't, then you could just wind up losing the game outright. Next up on the list is going to be Jace Mirror Mage. So Jace Mirror Mage is a brand new, well, not brand new, I guess, but is, since I last updated the Planeswalker tier list, a new mono blue Planeswalker. So Jace happens to have this sweet +7 to blue, which is a really nice mana bonus. And then for the 3 abilities, they're actually kind of funky because you got 4 loyalty, 12 loyalty, and then 3 loyalty. So they're all going to be based on like fetching cards and getting copies. So the first one is going to pick 2 of the first 4 cards from target player's library and destroy those cards. You can use it to start milling things. And then Kicker, so you can drain 3 mana from your hand to then draw 2 cards. So you can use this on yourself to try and influence the 2 cards that you're going to draw. Or you can use this on your opponent to get rid of some of their big cards that you don't want them to draw. Or alternatively, you can just use this on yourself to throw things in the graveyard that you can ultimately get back. The second ability is going to create the Embodied Symmetry token. This is going to make it so that each card in your hand that's a copy gains 3 mana. And when you drain mana from your hand, you may destroy the top 2 cards of target player's library. So this was based on the whole Kicker thing in Zendikar. And so with all of that Kicker stuff going on, you could go ahead, kick, drain mana, and then destroy cards from the library. Furthermore, you're going to create a copy of Jace Mirror Mage, the Vanguard. This is actually a very surprisingly decent Vanguard, which basically you just use it to fetch a card and give it full mana. It gets disabled, so you can't cast it the turn that you fetch it, but it makes it so that you're basically just going to be drawing a whole bunch of cards and giving them full mana, which is a very useful ability. Finally, the third ability, Glimpse of Infinitude, is going to create a copy in your hand of the top card of your library. Then if that card is a monocolored blue card, it gets full mana and you lose X loyalty, where X is the card's base mana cost. If you don't have enough loyalty, you're going to lose X times 2 life instead, and this cannot give stored mana. I find that even though you have the first ability that you could use to try and influence the top of your deck, and then you could just use this third ability to get full mana, I just find myself using the second ability, Embodied Symmetry, instead. And so when I first started running Jace, I was just absolutely blown away by the number of cards that I could play with Jace, which was really good. Jace is currently struggling with the general lack of removal in blue. Blue really does not have, had not had too great of removal until Crimson Vow. But nonetheless, Jace is still a really good card. I would say, as Planeswalker, I would say that Jace is at a very similar level right now as Sorin over there. Jace has no way to win on his own. He definitely needs you to have good cards in order to be good. And so as a result of that, Jace is going to land in the B tier for me. The next one on the list is going to be Jeska Thrice Reborn. This is one that a lot of you asked me for a review on. I didn't wind up getting my Jeska Thrice Reborn video out. That was a little bit due to general burnout, a little bit due to just the timing of it was really, really bad. And then a little bit due to I didn't feel like my footage was the most interesting. So it was just sort of like a perfect storm of badness that that sort of came up. But Jeska Thrice Reborn has a +4/+4/+4 to her mana gains. The first ability is going to discard all cards without mana from your hand, and you're going to draw that many cards. Then you're going to deal that much damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. Then if there are 12 or more cards in your graveyard, which you're ultimately going to get to by discarding cards in your hand, you're going to deal 3 times that damage instead. The next ability is going to reinforce a creature you control 3 times until end of turn, and if your opponent controls more creatures than you, including their reinforcements, it's going to reinforce 6 times instead. And then finally, the third ability is going to create a Jeska's Will token. That token is going to make it so that when a spell card enters your graveyard from anywhere, if it doesn't have Buried, it gains Flashback and Buried, equal to its mana cost. Then the first card with Flashback in your graveyard gains 3 mana. Then, when this support loses shields for the first time each turn, fetch the first spell card from your library. That card gains X mana. X is the number of cards in your opponent's hand. And if this support has the Rebirth emblem, then that card gains X times 3 mana instead. So the way that you get the Rebirth emblem is just by leveling Jeska up. Jeska does not originally give the Rebirth emblem to the token, but once you've leveled her up and ranked up this third ability, Thrice Remembered, it will just automatically gain that Rebirth emblem when you use the ability. You're also going to destroy 9 non-red gems, and then if there are less than 9 red gems, you're going to destroy 27 non-red gems instead. Jeska's one of those Planeswalkers that looks like she could be really strong, but it's just that Flashback and Buried really aren't that good of mechanics in Puzzle Quest. Hopefully something will come out that will make them worth using. With that said, there's definitely a lot of like little hidden power inside of Jeska's kit. It's just not ultimately that great because Buried is not that great. So as a result, Jeska falls into the C tier for me. Next up on our list, we're moving on to our Lilianas. So here we've got Liliana, Waker of the Dead. So Liliana, Waker of the Dead is the M21 Black Planeswalker. And so this one's got the +4/+4/+3 mana bonuses again. The first ability is going to make it so that each player discards the last card without mana from their hand. And if your opponent can't discard, then they lose 6 life and you gain 6 life. The second ability, Undying Torment, is going to give target opposing creature -X/-X until end of turn, which is going to be equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. Then if that creature dies, it comes back into play under your control and becomes a zombie. Then she has the third ability to create a Waker of the Dead token. So it's going to make it so that at the beginning of combat on your turn, you pick one of the first 3 different creature cards from your graveyard and put it directly into play under your control and give it the zombie subtype. Then you can destroy a creature you control, and if you do, you draw 2 cards and you gain 9 life. So between her having these generally subpar mana gains, and then she is definitely a graveyard-themed Planeswalker, but she just doesn't have a way of independently throwing things in the graveyard. So she's reliant on you having cards that are going to throw things in the graveyard. If, let's say, for example, we take Liliana, Untouched by Death, and we moved her first ability right here, or heck, even if we just took these 2 right here, and we put these abilities on Liliana, Untouched by Death, then Liliana Untouched by Death would be an S+ tier Planeswalker that I think would be better than a lot of the dual and tricolor walkers as well. But that is definitely not the case. So as a result of that, this Planeswalker is really limited by the fact that she just doesn't have a way of making her other abilities work well. So she's very reliant on cards that exist in the standard. So as a result of that, I don't really feel like she has a whole lot of power. The more that I play with other Planeswalkers, the more that I wind up liking them more than I like Liliana, Waker of the Dead. And so as a result, Liliana, Waker of the Dead is going to end up in the C tier for me. You might notice that a lot of these Planeswalkers are like either a little bit higher or a little bit lower than when I first played with them. So there's definitely that whole, like, when you first play with something and you can make it feel really strong. And so it's definitely going to feel that way. And this came out at the time that we had Garuda, and we don't have Garuda in Standard anymore. We really don't have that many great options of milling our library for that matter. And so things just sort of end up settling. And so I think that in general, some things are going to settle a little bit lower. Some things are going to settle a little bit higher. This brings us to the Puzzle Masters Liliana. I didn't actually pick up the Puzzle Masters Liliana, the Master of Death. She's currently in the store right now. She's definitely a really cool Planeswalker, but she definitely just looks like more of a niche Planeswalker to me. So she has the passive ability for this whole buried thing. When a creature you control with buried dies, it gets half its mana. This would be a lot cooler to me if it was just when a creature you control dies, it gains buried and half of its mana, but that's just more a result of buried, once again, being a not very good mechanic. I actually really don't like the Chain Veil. I've been playing around with this card quite a bit, and just because I happen to have the card itself, it was in the Puzzle Master set, and I don't like how much it actually hurts you for being on the board. The Endless Ranks of the Dead token that she makes is definitely really cool. I've gone up against this once, and it's definitely on the scary side. But the thing about it is that you need to get zombies going in order for it to be good. And while she definitely has ways of making zombies, including the actual Endless Ranks of the Dead token itself, which is really, really cool, I find that the other two Lilianas up here are honestly just better zombie planeswalkers than Liliana Master of Death is herself. It could be that if I played with her, I might wind up jumping her up a tier. I do think that her abilities are definitely better than Liliana from M21. So I do think that she rests probably in this B tier, but this is just guesswork because I don't personally have her. The next Planeswalker on the list is Lolth. So Lolth, if we scroll all the way back on up, the Spider Queen, has this +5 for 3 split of mana bonuses, and has the passive ability that makes it so that when you play a mono black card, each player loses 2 life. For that matter, her whole kit is really based on losing life. So the first ability is going to make it so you create the Demon Web Pits token. You'll see that the third ability creates that token as well, but it also gives it the Darkness Emblem. So when we go over the Darkness Emblem portion on the bottom, how do you get it? You use the third ability. So this makes it so that when a creature you control dies, you gain 2 loyalty. And if the card is a non-token creature, you get a Black Spider token. Then if this support has the Darkness Emblem, when a non-token creature dies, you create X Spider tokens. X is equal to that creature's toughness. So you're able to get a whole bunch of these Black Spider tokens, which is super, super sweet. And then those Black Spider tokens are actually... it's not letting me pull it up, but I want to say that they're 2/1 Spider tokens. The second ability is actually a little bit confusing to me. So we're going to go ahead and destroy target creature, then create a copy of Drider on the battlefield and give it the Darkness Emblem, and then each player loses life. So Drider says when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's Planeswalker, create a Black Spider token, and if it has the Darkness Emblem, when you lose life on your turn, your opponent loses that life as well. But this Black Spider token that Drider makes is, for some reason, different than the Black Spider token that the Demon Web Pit makes. And so that means that between Drider, the token that Drider makes, and the Demon Web Pits, that's all 3 of your creature slots. So it definitely doesn't work itself out too well together. With that said, her abilities definitely have a lot of power, but because her whole kit is centered around her losing life, and she really doesn't have good ways of gaining life, she is not that strong of a Planeswalker to me. I don't mind the idea of losing life. When I play Paper Magic, I see life as basically another resource of yours. It's kind of like an extension of mana. I do not think that Lolth Spider Queen is all that great. Even though she has a destroy creature ability, she has a lot of power in her kit. So don't get me wrong, there's definitely a lot of power in her kit. And you could argue that the power in her kit is greater than some of the Planeswalkers in this C tier, or maybe even all of the other Planeswalkers in the C tier, and that it rivals some of the ones in the B tier. But it's just the whole kit is making you lose life, and even her passive ability is going to make you lose life, which I find definitely dings her down a tier for me. Next up on the list is going to be Lukka number 2, the Lukka Wayward Bonder. So this one has a very nice +6/+3/3 for the mana bonuses. The first ability is going to discard a card and draw cards, and then if the last card is in your graveyard as a creature, meaning if you choose to discard a creature, you draw 3 cards instead and give all the creatures in your hand a permanent +2/+2 buff. Then the second ability is going to pick one of the first 4 creatures from your graveyard and return it to the battlefield with its reinforcements. In order for it to return with reinforcements, it had to be on the battlefield and reinforced in the first place. And then when it dies, it actually dies with that reinforcement counter on it that the game seems to save. So in order for this to really do anything good for you, you need to have had a creature reinforced on the battlefield die. It's not like you can just continually discard multiple copies of the same creature and then just have them all come back together. Then the third ability is going to create a Mila Crafty Companion token in your hand and deal X damage to your opponent's Planeswalker, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard and your exile. So this one has this white fox support that has when the first opposing creature attacks, it gets -2/-0 in Berserker, and when a non-token creature you control becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, draw a card and give it half its mana. If it's not invoked, which it wouldn't be, when an opposing creature deals damage to a creature you control, disable it for 2 turns. So it gets disabled for its turn, your turn, and then it's undisabled again. That said, this is about as close to an F-tier Planeswalker as we can get in the new Planeswalkers. The mana bonuses kind of save Lukka from being an F-tier Planeswalker, although the abilities for Lukka definitely could pit him with the rest of these terrible Planeswalkers down here. But I'm going to go ahead and put Lukka in the D tier because at least the mana bonuses are some form of salvation. But with that said, I would not recommend picking up any of the Planeswalkers down here anyways. If you want to pick up some of the C tier Planeswalkers for fun, by all means, go ahead. But below the C tier means that they're not passable Planeswalkers, right? I mean, if you think of it in terms of schooling, like an A is a good grade, B is a good grade, maybe for some of you, C is a good grade. When I say B is a good grade for some of you, I would get really mad at myself when I got Bs. So, and then as a teacher, when I was giving out grades, you know, I was like, all right, we're going to strive to get all A's for everyone. So, not that I would just give out free A's. So, anyways, that was not in any way to be like, if you were someone who was like scraping by and picking up C's, that's not to say that I am disparaging on the struggle. I was very lucky and did not have to do a lot of work as I went to school, and so that definitely made my life a lot easier. Anywho, tangent. Don't need to go on that tangent. Next up, Mordenkainen. Mordenkainen is a mono blue Planeswalker. Mordenkainen is going to have the passive ability that's actually quite sweet. Mordenkainen's Lubrication, which makes it so that when you play a blue card, you can discard the last card from your hand to draw a card, the first one in a turn. Mordenkainen's abilities are going to be based on rolling a d20. So the first ability is going to draw cards, and then you're going to pick up to the first 4 cards in your hand and either 50% chance exile it or 50% chance to give it some form of mana, either half or full. The second ability is going to create a Faithful Hound creature token that's going to have, when it attacks, remove all buffs from the first opposing buff creature. And when this creature enters the battlefield, it gets +2/+2 for each card with a different name in your hand, for a maximum of +6/+6. Then you're going to roll a d20, and the Faithful Hound is an illusion creature. You're going to give your illusion creatures, including the Faithful Hound, some evergreens. Finally, the third ability is Penultimate Cogitation, which is going to create Mordenkainen's Penultimate Cogitation token. That's going to make it so that when you cast a non-copy spell card for the first time each turn, you're going to roll a d20. If it's a 1 to 10, you're going to copy that card and give it half mana. If it's an 11 to 18, you're going to copy that card and give it full mana. You're going to get 2 casts of it. If it's a 19 or 20, then you're going to copy it, and each spell in your hand gains full mana. Furthermore, when you use the ability, you're going to exile your hand and draw the first 6 different cards from your library and give them all half of their mana. Mordenkainen has a lot of really cool abilities, and I actually really like the idea of the theme of all of the roll a d20 going with Mordenkainen. But nonetheless, even though the abilities are really cool and the mana bonuses are really solid, they're definitely better blue Planeswalkers. So for me, Mordenkainen is going to ultimately rest in the C tier. There just isn't like extreme power in his kit. The mana bonuses are actually pretty excellent. But even though the mana bonuses are pretty excellent, I didn't really get like a very strong sense of power fantasy from Mordenkainen. Which brings us to our next Liliana, Professor Onyx. So Professor Onyx is Liliana. But anywho, her 3 abilities are actually quite good. So the first ability, Morbid Research, is going to pick one of the first 4 cards from your library and destroy the others. If that fetch card is a spell, you're going to copy it, and then otherwise and give it 3 mana. Otherwise, your opponent loses 3 life. Painful Lesson is going to create a Dissection class token. So that's going to make it so that when you cast a spell, your opponent loses 2 life. You gain 3 life, up to 3 in a turn. And when your opponent casts or copies a spell, the first opposing creature with the greatest power gets -2/-2, and your opponent loses 2 life. The more important part of the ability is that it makes it so that your opponent discards their first non-spell card, and then the first spell card in your hand gains full mana. So if your opponent's charging up a creature, given that Greg tends to charge up creatures first, you can make your opponent discard that first card with its mana, and then you can give yourself an edge by giving your first spell full mana. And then finally, the third ability, Last Monography, is an absolutely phenomenal ability. Your opponent discards 6 cards, which is going to be their whole hand, and then they're going to lose X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards in both graveyards. And then if your opponent discarded less than 4 cards this way, then X is going to be increased by 20. So you can wind up getting incredible control with this ability, and then you could wind up also killing your opponent as well. Just because of how these 2 Lilianas have been in terms of their power, Professor Onyx is actually in the A tier for me right now. Some of that is definitely influenced by the existence of nonsense like Tainted Adversary. And then the other part is that she lost access to Ruinous Ultimatum. And I feel like losing access to Ruinous Ultimatum hurts her a little bit more than it hurt the other 2 Lilianas, just because she is a Planeswalker that is going to be better based on the spells that you can throw into her. And I just don't feel like Black really needs this Painful Lesson as much, because a lot of the removal that you're going to be running in Black now is only going to cost you 8 or less mana. And so you're going to be able to achieve that by making any Black match over here. And the same is going to be true by making any Black match with those 2 over there. So you just don't need that Painful Lesson as much. And then with regards to fetching cards from your library, I'd rather throw 8 cards into my graveyard and build a graveyard deck than fetch one of the first 4. And then Last Monography gives absolutely excellent control, but I would also rather kill my opponent more quickly. So it's just a personal preference thing. I think you could make a solid argument for Professor Onyx being in the S tier. She definitely has the power in her kit for it, but I just happen to think that the other Lilianas are a bit better right now. So next up on the list is going to be Serra the Benevolent. Serra the Benevolent looked like the Planeswalker that we always needed in white when she came out, and then Grandmaster of Flowers came out and was just better. So Serra the Benevolent has the first ability to make it so that target creature you control gets a permanent +4/+4 first strike and flying buff, which is actually very relevant. I actually have been able to beat every single time it's come around the Into the Dungeon event. I've been able to beat the Tiamat node with just commons and uncommons using Serra the Benevolent and just spamming this first ability. Giving first strike and flying to any creature with vigilance makes it so that you can just absolutely wipe out the Tiamat node pretty easily. So I definitely think that Serra the Benevolent is really good, even if just it's for this first ability, if you need to find a way to be able to beat that Tiamat node. Anyways, the second ability is going to create a Serra Archangel token. That Serra Archangel token is a 6/4 flyer with Leader Angel. And then when an angel creature you control attacks, this creature gets +2/+2 and protection from your opponent's Planeswalker colors until the beginning of your next turn. This is especially relevant because this Radiant Serra Archangel token is going to have Leader Angel, and Angelic Destiny is going to make it so that you can make any creature into an angel, which enables the Radiant Serra Archangel token to eat it all up and then beat down on your opponent. This really doesn't wind up working out as smoothly as Grandmaster of Flowers' third ability, because let's say that you have the Radiant Serra Archangel token on the battlefield, and then you make a creature stack become an angel. The leader actually waits until the beginning of your turn to search for targets that it can absorb. So you'll use Angelic Destiny, but it gives your opponent a turn to kill that Angelic Destiny token stack before it gets absorbed by the Radiant Serra Archangel. So you actually have to use Angelic Destiny first, and then play the Serra Archangel. But then you run into the same problem of Serra Archangel doesn't have haste, and so then your opponent can still kill the Serra Archangel before it attacks. And so just for that reason alone, I think that Grandmaster of Flowers is better, even though it's going to cost 21 loyalty for his third ability, where it costs 18 for the combination of these two. You can just use this third ability and kill your opponent, whereas with these two, you're giving your opponent a turn to respond, and I don't like giving my opponents turns to respond. The third ability, Angelic Renewal, is absolutely terrible. You're going to create an Angelic Renewal token, so when a non-creature you control dies, exile it, and when a creature card is exiled from your graveyard, you create a Vigilant Angel token. It may be that this will actually be a little bit better with us actually getting some cards that are going to exile graveyards, but even still, white doesn't have a whole lot of great ways of throwing creatures into the graveyard anyways, and then Foretell is just Foretell, so... then after you do this, you're going to exile each creature card from your graveyard. Same problem though, you just don't really have that many ways of getting creatures in your graveyard with white. And then you gain 2 life for each cleric exiled this way, and your angel creatures get +1/+1 for each warrior exiled this way. So really you're using Serra the Benevolent for the first 2 abilities, and this wonderful +7 to white, which is absolutely a big deal. So Serra the Benevolent is absolutely an A-tier Planeswalker for me. I was considering that she could potentially be an S-tier Planeswalker, but then Grandmaster of Flowers came out and just did what she does better. She's still pretty high up because her mana bonuses are so excellent, and then also this Angelic Destiny is, I think, the best ability for a newer player to be able to take out that incredibly difficult node in the Enter a Dungeon. Which brings us to Mono Blue Teferi, Master of Time. So Mono Blue Teferi was the blue Planeswalker from the M21 set. And when Teferi Master of Time came out, he blew away a lot of us by his third ability. It just looked absolutely ridiculous because you get a whole bunch of extra swaps from it. The first ability is going to make it so that you discard the last card without mana from your hand and draw 3 cards, and then you create a Winds of Fate token. So this is going to give prowess, your first creature gets +1/+1, and flying. In anticipation, if you play a card with flash on your opponent's turn, you drain 2 mana from the first card in your opponent's hand. Then we've got Timeless Image, which disables target creature until the beginning of your next turn. And if it's an opposing creature, you get a copy of it under the battlefield under your control, or you can reinforce a creature, which is actually a really solid ability. And then finally, we have the Master of Time, which is going to create a Master of Time token and draw 3 cards. And this says when you make your first match during your turn, gain 2 extra swaps, and then Resourceful 2. So when you draw your second and third card, the first non-creature card in your hand gains 2 mana. So Teferi Master of Time actually really struggles because of the way that this ability here works. So if you are playing any gem conversion and that gem conversion makes a match at the beginning of your turn, it counts as making a match, but you then don't get the 2 extra swaps. So as a result of that, Teferi Master of Time, I find I only wind up getting the 2 extra swaps the turn that I use it. So it's kind of like 18 loyalty to get 2 extra swaps and draw 3 cards, which isn't a terrible ability, but it definitely isn't a great ability either. So between that and then just there being so many better blue Planeswalkers, because blue really struggles with removal, as I mentioned, and so it makes it so that blue kind of needs another color for the most part, unless it has the overwhelming power of Jace and Raveler. This Teferi actually winds up landing in the B tier for me. He's still in the B tier because it's really easy to run certain combo decks with him, like a Wizard class deck, which is really, really strong. And so Teferi is still definitely a good Planeswalker. He's just not a great Planeswalker. So he's not one that you actually desperately need to get your paws on. Which brings us to Tyvar Kell. So Tyvar I did not pick up. I know that a lot of you have asked me about Tyvar. Tyvar is an elf-themed Planeswalker. So basically it's going to make it so that you can buff your elves, you can create elves, and then you can buff your elves even more. And so you're going to be able to use this Whisper of the Aenir, which is going to make it so that when an elf creature enters play, you convert gems to green. When an elf creature you control dies, convert gems to black. And then this can trigger up to 4 times per turn. Tyvar winds up having a +5/+4 mana bonus to green and black. And I want to say just a 0 bonus to blue, white, and red. But with that said, none of the 3 abilities are particularly great abilities, and it's definitely based on elves, and so it's going to be entirely reliant on elves. Elves just have never been great in Puzzle Quest. There's been a number of times that they've been pretty good, but just not great. It's nice that this is a Planeswalker that has a built-in win condition, which is pretty cool. So I definitely think there's a place for it. It's just not going to be in the good list of Planeswalker place. So I don't have this Planeswalker, once again, so I could be wrong about this. I just really don't think I am. There's a reason I don't have it. Which brings us to Wrenn and Seven. Wrenn and Stimpy 7 is a mono-green Planeswalker that came to us in Innistrad Midnight Hunt and has the passive ability Symbiosis to make it so that when you convert gems for the first time during your turn, you convert 2 gems to green. This ability alone is almost S tier worthy. It's absolutely ridiculous. You convert so many gems with this Planeswalker, it's completely filthy. The second ability is going to enable you to pick up to 4 of the first 4 cards from your Planeswalker, and then, from your library, fetch those cards and destroy the top 4 cards of your library. Then all land cards in your hand gain half of their mana. So this ability right here is just absolutely ridiculous. You could make a solid argument for this being the best first ability in the game. It's so good. You get to draw 4 cards, destroy 4 cards from your library, and give half mana to all the lands in your hand. And you get to pick up to which of those cards you're going to draw, which is crazy. The second ability is garbage. So, hosting gems, target creature you control gets +X+X. X is equal to the amount of green gems, up to 10. I don't see why it has this up to 10. It is not good. Then Coven, convert 2 gems to green. So if you've got 2 creatures with different powers, you're going to convert 2 gems to green. So, once again, I think I've used this once when I was making a video for this walker, and that's it. Third ability creates an overflowing token. That overflowing token is going to have mana field, draw a card, and when you draw a card, if you have 6 cards in hand, convert 1 gem to green. This effect can trigger up to 3 times per turn. Furthermore, you then get to pick 2 of the first 4 non-land cards from your graveyard, fetch them, and give them full mana. So this ability is definitely really useful if you find yourself with an abundance of loyalty and you've used your first ability a number of times to just throw things in the graveyard. So you can wind up getting back some really powerful things. That said, when I'm using Wrenn and Seven, I'm almost exclusively using the first ability unless I wind up using this to finish off my opponent. Wrenn and Seven, I think, is going to be an excellent Planeswalker no matter what, and is going to be the 3rd green Planeswalker in the S+ tier list for me. It is just so ridiculously good. Now, the final Planeswalker on our list is going to be Zariel, Archduke of Avernus. So Zariel, Archduke of Avernus, is going to be based on rolling a d20. She has a heck of a lot of power in her kit. So the first ability is going to make it so you a 1 to 10 on a d20 is going to give your creatures +6/+0 and haste. An 11-19 is going to give to 19 is going to destroy 6 non-red gems, and a 20 is going to do all of those and refund the loyalty. The second ability, Legions of Avernus, is going to create a red devil token. That red devil token is going to have, when this creature dies, the opponent's first creature takes damage equal to this creature's power. It's just a 1/1, but it's then going to get reinforced X times, where X is 4 plus the roll result. And then if that result is 16 or more, your creatures get a permanent +X+0 buff and get Berserker and haste. Finally, the third ability is going to create a Blood War token, which makes it so that when your first creature attacks, you're going to reinforce that creature and give it double strike until end of turn. Then if this support has the War Emblem, when a creature dies, you're going to deal X damage to your opponent's Planeswalker. X is equal to that creature's power, which is actually really, really good. And then that support gets the War Emblem, so that's how we get it. And then finally, you're going to roll a d20 and deal X damage to any opposing target, where it's going to be 5 plus the roll result. So Zariel has an awful lot of power in her kit. The only thing that really holds her back is just that you are relying on a d20. So you're going to have some matches where Legions of Avernus just goes absolutely ham and just completely wrecks your opponent. And then you're going to have some matches where it just feels like it does nothing. Blood War is going to be good regardless, but it's just having that variability between the damage here and the tokens makes it so that this Planeswalker, while it has an incredible amount of power in its kit, I don't think that it's on the same level as, say, Jaya or Lukka, or even Koth up here in the heavy hitters. So that does it for the mono color Planeswalkers. I know this video is like crazy long. It's just there's so much to go over in these tier list videos. I just don't see how to make them short. So I'll see if I can't save this and include a download for you guys so that you guys can go ahead and just download this if you want it. Once again, just as a final wrap up, the S+ tier Planeswalkers here, it sort of goes against the idea of the S+ tier just because monocolored Planeswalkers are always going to be reliant on what exists in Standard. But I feel like it's not entirely fair to say that like no Planeswalker in the mono tier should be S+, but please take with a grain of salt the S+ tier Planeswalkers in mono as opposed to, say, dual colors and tricolors. For that matter, these here would all be just an S tier Planeswalker on the dual list, just because they're really good right now, but they don't outclass the dual color Planeswalker for the long haul. So just keep that in mind. Take it with a grain of salt. With that said, I am a player who plays almost exclusively with monocolor Planeswalkers. I just rotate which ones I use based on what rotates with Standard. And I think that these Planeswalkers up top, and then arguably even Liliana right here, are going to be the Planeswalkers that you're probably going to wind up choosing if you play that route, just always, because they're just better than the other monocolored Planeswalkers. They just perform the same roles better for the most part. So I hope this is helpful to you all. If I have anything out of place based on where you think it should be, by all means, let me know. You can add that to the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.